Could a civilization truly claim enlightenment while disenfranchising 50% of its intellectual and moral potential? Welcome to our historical examination of the 66th most pivotal event in human history, the global struggle for women's voting rights. We investigate an 80-year political marathon that transformed the fundamental social and legal landscapes of modern democratic nations. This epic journey leads us from the intellectual parlors of New York to the defiant hunger strikes in dark prison cells. The Industrial Revolution of the 19th century fundamentally altered the economic fabric of society, creating new roles for women. Legal and social doctrines during this era imposed severe limitations on women's autonomy within the private and public spheres. The suffrage movement found its earliest roots in the abolitionist campaigns, where women gained essential political organizing skills. During the 1840 World Anti-Slavery Convention, female delegates were barred from participation based solely on their gender identity. This profound experience of exclusion led Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott to vow to hold their own independent convention. Women were frequently denied access to higher education and professional opportunities, reinforcing their marginalized status within the larger community. Many contemporary religious doctrines serve to justify the subordinate position of women, presenting it as a natural and divinely ordained order. Economic policies often prohibited married women from owning property or controlling their own wages, ensuring their financial dependency on men. Approximately 300 individuals gathered at the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls in July 1848 for the first convention. Stanton introduced the Declaration of Sentiments, intentionally modeling it after the foundational language of the Declaration of Independence. The document itemized 16 specific grievances that highlighted the systemic injustices women endured under the existing patriarchal legal framework. The most controversial resolution demanded the elective franchise, a request many contemporary observers viewed as an impossibly radical social change. Frederick Douglass provided the essential intellectual support necessary to pass the suffrage resolution during the heated convention debates. Ultimately, 68 women and 32 men signed the historic declaration, cementing their commitment to the pursuit of gender equality. The moral guidance of Quaker activists provided a critical foundation for the movement's early emphasis on universal human rights. Following Seneca Falls, the movement began to expand nationally, attracting thousands of participants to subsequent annual women's rights conventions. The outbreak of the American Civil War in 1861 effectively halted organized suffrage activism for several grueling years. Women demonstrated their patriotism and organizational capacity through essential war support work, including nursing and coordinating hospital supplies. The Women's Loyal National League successfully collected nearly 400,000 signatures to petition for the abolition of slavery nationwide. Following the conflict, many activists expected their wartime contributions to be rewarded with the recognition of their own citizenship rights. A bitter schism emerged when the 15th Amendment proposed granting voting rights based on race but not on gender identity. Susan B. Anthony and Stanton formed the National Woman Suffrage Association to pursue a federal amendment including women's voting rights. Simultaneously, Lucy Stone established the American Woman Suffrage Association, prioritizing a more moderate state-by-state strategy for achieving victory. The movement remained deeply divided for over 20 years as each organization pursued distinct legal and political pathways to success. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony deliberately tested the legal system by attempting to cast a ballot in Rochester, New York. Anthony was promptly arrested for illegal voting, an event that she utilized to generate massive national publicity for the cause. During her trial, she argued that the 14th Amendment's citizenship clause implicitly granted her the fundamental right of political participation. The presiding judge ordered her to pay a fine of $100, which she famously refused to ever pay. The Supreme Court later ruled in 1875 that citizenship alone does not automatically confer the right of elective suffrage. Senator Aaron Sargent introduced the first woman suffrage amendment in 1878, containing the words that would eventually become law. These legal defeats forced the movement to pivot its strategy away from judicial interpretations toward direct constitutional amendments. Anthony's persistent defiance transformed her into a national symbol of the movement's unwavering commitment to achieving absolute gender justice. The two rival organizations finally reunified in 1890 to form the National American Woman's Suffrage Association under Stanton's leadership. Early victories emerged from the American West, where frontier conditions often encouraged more fluid and egalitarian gender roles in society. Wyoming entered the Union as the inaugural suffrage state in 1890, setting a critical precedent for subsequent Western territories. Colorado and Utah granted women the right to vote in the 1890s, further demonstrating the viability of women's political participation. Carrie Chapman Catt later implemented her disciplined winning plan to synchronize state-level campaigns with the push for a federal amendment. Strategic alliances with labor organizations brought millions of working-class women into the struggle, diversifying the movement's socioeconomic base. Mary Church Terrell led the National Association of Colored Women, fighting against both gender discrimination and systemic racial disenfranchisement. The Women's Christian Temperance Union became a powerful ally, viewing the vote as the essential tool for home and family protection. A younger generation led by Alice Paul introduced militant tactics inspired by the radical suffragette movement in the United Kingdom. In 1913, Paul organized a massive parade of 8,000 women in Washington on the eve of the presidential inauguration. The marchers were brutally harassed by aggressive crowds while police stood by, generating widespread national sympathy for the protesters. The National Woman's Party began picketing the White House gates in 1917 as the first group of silent sentinels. Protesters held banners asking President Wilson how long women must continue to wait for their fundamental right to liberty. Following the U.S. entry into the war, hundreds of picketers were arrested for obstructing traffic and sent to the Occoquan workhouse. Inside the cold stone walls of the Occoquan workhouse, Alice Paul and other activists initiated a desperate hunger strike. Prison authorities responded with invasive and brutal force feedings to prevent the hunger strikers from becoming martyrs. The infamous Night of Terror witnessed 33 suffragists being systematically beaten and tortured by the prison guards. Secretly smuggled reports of this state-sponsored abuse ignited a massive firestorm of public indignation across the entire country. Facing mounting domestic and international pressure, President Woodrow Wilson finally announced his support for the suffrage amendment. Wilson officially declared the federal amendment a vitally necessary war measure during his historic address to the Senate. The House of Representatives successfully passed the 19th Amendment with exactly the required two-thirds majority in early 1918. On June 4, 1919, the Senate finally approved the amendment, clearing the way for the national ratification process. The battle then shifted to the state legislatures, where the movement required approval from 36 independent states. Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan were the inaugural states to ratify within days of the amendment's federal passage. By the summer of 1920, 35 states had ratified, leaving the entire movement one single vote short of victory. Tennessee served as the ultimate battleground where both sides gathered for a final and decisive legislative confrontation. Nashville was transformed into a chaotic political arena during what contemporary observers termed the historic War of the Roses. Pro-suffragists wore yellow roses while their opponents donned red roses to signal their unwavering ideological positions in the chamber. The legislative session was marked by intense and sometimes physical confrontations as the final vote count remained dangerously uncertain. 24-year-old Representative Harry Byrne initially appeared to favor the anti-suffrage cause, wearing a red rose on his lapel. Moments before the final roll call, Byrne received a critical letter from his mother, Feb Ensminger Byrne, containing a mother's advice. She urged her son to be a good boy and help Mrs. Catt put the rat in ratification. In a shocking turn of events, Harry Byrne cast his vote in favor of the amendment, breaking the legislative deadlock. The 19th Amendment was officially ratified by a single vote, ending 72 years of persistent and courageous political advocacy. Anti-suffragists attempted several desperate legal maneuvers to overturn the result, but their efforts were ultimately and decisively defeated. Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby officially certified the ratification at his private residence on August 26, 1920. This landmark victory granted 26 million American women the legal right to participate in the democratic processes of their nation. The presidential election of 1920 marked the first time women nationwide could cast ballots for the highest office in the land. Following the amendment, women began to secure positions in state legislatures and local governing bodies across the diverse American landscape. Despite this victory, millions of black women in the South remain disenfranchised by discriminatory Jim Crow laws and local policies. Racial exclusion within the movement left a complex and deeply troubled legacy that would take decades of further struggle to address. Discriminatory literacy tests and prohibitive poll taxes were systematically employed to prevent women of color from exercising their new legal rights. The struggle for truly universal suffrage would continue for another 45 years until the height of the modern civil rights era. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 finally secured the ballot for many who had been excluded by the 19th Amendment's implementation. The American victory served as a significant catalyst for similar suffrage movements appearing in numerous nations across the global community. By the mid-20th century, the right of women to participate in political elections became an internationally recognized human rights standard. The inclusion of women in the electorate led to significant shifts in national social policies regarding child labor and public health education. Increased political representation facilitated greater access to higher education and professional career paths for subsequent generations of women. Securing the vote was a critical precursor to achieving broader economic liberties and independent property rights for women in every state. The movement's triumph precipitated a profound and irreversible cultural shift in traditional perceptions of gender roles and societal responsibilities. The sophisticated grassroots organizing techniques developed by suffragists became a blueprint for countless future social and political movements. Today, the presence of women in global leadership positions serves as a testament to the enduring impact of the 72-year suffrage struggle. While the legal right to vote was secured, the broader quest for absolute gender equality remains an ongoing and unfinished global project. We honor the millions of unnamed activists whose persistent courage and profound sacrifices made this historic transformation possible for humanity. The struggle for women's suffrage represents one of the most successful and non-violent political transformations in all of human history. Expanding the electorate effectively doubled the moral and intellectual capacity of the democratic system to address complex social challenges. This movement teaches us that fundamental progress often requires decades of unwavering persistence and the courage to challenge entrenched norms. The historical complexities of the suffrage era remind us of the critical importance of pursuing inclusive and intersectional justice for all citizens. The ballot remains the most essential tool for individuals to protect their liberties and influence the future direction of their collective society. The spirit of the suffragists continues to inspire modern movements for human rights and political representation across every continent on Earth. By securing the 19th Amendment, humanity took a definitive step toward fulfilling the true promise of a just and representative democracy. We are reminded that the health of our democratic institutions depends upon the active and informed participation of every eligible citizen. The dream of absolute equality remains the guiding light for the continued evolution of our global social and political structures toward justice. This concludes our comprehensive examination of the epic 72-year struggle for women's suffrage, a victory that changed the world forever. The American struggle was deeply influenced by the militant tactics of the British suffragettes led by Emmeline Pankhurst. New Zealand had already established a global precedent by becoming the first self-governing nation to grant women the vote in 1893. Australia followed shortly thereafter, granting most women the right to vote and stand for federal parliament in 1902. Across Europe, the aftermath of the First World War saw a significant wave of nations recognizing women's political citizenship. Following the 1920 victory, Alice Paul authored the Equal Rights Amendment to ensure absolute legal protection against gender discrimination. The Equal Rights Amendment was first introduced to Congress in 1923, beginning a secondary century-long legal battle. The National American Woman Suffrage Association transitioned into the League of Women Voters to educate and mobilize the new electorate. Carrie Chapman Catt dedicated her later years to international peace movements and the global expansion of democratic rights for all. Ida B. Wells Barnett continued to fight for the rights of Black women, ensuring their voices were not erased from the historical record. The intersections of race, class, and gender remain central to the ongoing evolution of American social and political reform efforts. The achievements of the first-wave suffragists provided the essential foundation for the second-wave feminist movements of the 1960s. Legislative victories such as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act further expanded the legal protections first envisioned by the suffragists. Statistical evidence shows a direct correlation between political franchise and the dramatic increase of women in the professional workforce. By the late 20th century, women achieved parity in higher education enrollment, fulfilling a key demand of the Seneca Falls Declaration. The 1990s were often described as the year of the woman due to the unprecedented number of women elected to high office. Current data indicates that nations with higher female political representation often prioritize social welfare and environmental protection policies. Modern advocates continue to address the persistent challenges of the gender pay gap and the underrepresentation of women in executive leadership. The spirit of grassroots organizing has evolved into digital activism, continuing the tradition of mobilizing the public for social justice. Women in many parts of the global South continue to fight for basic political recognition and protection against systemic violence. International bodies such as UN Women now work to establish global standards for gender equality and political participation for all. The story of Harry Burns' single vote in Tennessee serves as a perennial reminder of the power inherent in every individual ballot. 72 years of persistent advocacy demonstrated that systemic change requires long-term commitment and strategic resilience from organizers. The brief and powerful text of the 19th Amendment remains a cornerstone of American constitutional law and civil rights history. The centennial celebrations in 2020 provided an opportunity to reflect on the immense progress achieved over the last century. The quest for truly universal and accessible suffrage remains a vital priority for contemporary democratic societies around the entire world. We offer our deepest respect to the intellectual pioneers who first articulated the demand for absolute and inherent human equality. We honor the courageous silent sentinels who endured physical hardship and state-sponsored abuse to secure the promise of liberty for all. The fundamental lesson of this movement is that every woman's voice is essential for the healthy functioning of a just society. The expansion of the franchise is part of the long and often difficult story of democracy's continued and necessary evolution for humanity. The triumph of the suffrage movement was not merely a victory for women, but a profound victory for the principles of justice for everyone. In the 1920 election, over 8 million women cast their ballots, representing roughly 36% of the total female population. Historical data reveals that urban women initially participated in elections at higher rates than their rural counterparts due to easier access to polls. Just 4 years after ratification, Nellie Taylor Ross of Wyoming became the first woman to serve as a state governor in American history. Hattie Caraway of Arkansas became the first woman elected to a full term in the United States Senate in 1932. Frances Perkins served as the first female cabinet member appointed by President Franklin Roosevelt as the Secretary of Labor during the Great Depression. The 26th Amendment in 1971 further expanded the electorate by lowering the minimum voting age to 18 for all citizens. Since 1980, women have consistently participated in presidential elections at higher rates than men, becoming a decisive political force. The 21st century has seen a significant increase in the election of women of color to local, state, and federal positions of authority. Nations such as Rwanda and Iceland currently lead the world in female parliamentary representation, demonstrating the global trend toward gender parity. Higher educational attainment continues to be the most significant predictor of political engagement and voter participation among the female population. The political franchise has empowered women to advocate for more equitable economic policies, including paid family leave and childcare support. Increased female representation in governing bodies has led to a greater national focus on maternal health and preventative medical research for all. Women leaders globally are at the forefront of climate change advocacy, prioritizing sustainable development and environmental justice for future generations. Social media platforms are now used to mobilize millions of women for political causes, continuing the tradition of sophisticated grassroots organizing. We are reminded that every generation must continue to defend and expand the rights first secured by the brave pioneers of the past. The journey from 1848 to 1920 remains a definitive masterclass in the power of persistent and principled social change. Reflecting on this monumental 72-year crusade, we recognize the immense sacrifices required to expand the boundaries of citizenship. The enduring legacy of these suffragists continues to empower millions of advocates fighting for equal representation across our global society. Their triumph reminds us that progress is often born from persistent advocacy and profound personal courage in the face of adversity. Thank you for accompanying us through this extensive academic exploration of the 66th most pivotal event in history. We hope this documentary provided valuable insights into the ongoing struggle for universal human rights and political justice. Thank you for your dedicated attention to these critical milestones of our collective past. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of the women's suffrage movement. May the lessons of these pioneers inspire your own journey toward justice and equality in every aspect of your life. Thank you for watching. 구독과 좋아요를 눌러주세요. 감사합니다. Please press subscribe and like. Thank you.